Who made you?
His name was Magnus. He took me from my room in Paris as I kicked and screamed. He kept me for a week, locked in a room full of corpses. Some freshly killed, some bloated and black. But they all looked like me. My coloring, my physique. My own eyes, staring back at me from rotting faces. He fed on me every night. And then he'd put me back in the tower with the look-alike corpses. I thought for sure I'd be one of them, but instead he turned me into this. No grand history of vampiric origins or physiology, no rules, no counsel. Just a sweeping end to a pile of money and the sight of him throwing himself into a fire. And then I was alone. I thought, I can't drink hot blood. I can't feed on others. I cried. I called to God. I didn't want this. But I have a capacity for enduring. It's why I don't particularly like being abandoned.
Hi everybody, welcome to the second session of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat book club. My name is Kirsten and it is so wonderful to have you here. If you are just joining us, Reid Along is essentially a semester-long seminar course, book study, book club centered around reading The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice in anticipation for AMC's Interview with the Vampire Season 3. We have discussion questions, we have a Google Classroom, we have a hashtag, and most importantly, we have these videos which come out every 2 weeks, which are centered around talking about certain specific aspects of the book and sections that we have read. I will link previous videos for Reid Along down below, as well as links to my Instagram and my Twitter and our Google Classroom. So that way, if you would like to find out some more information about it, possibly join us and share your insights on this amazingly detailed book, please do so. But otherwise, if you have been here for Reid Along, if you are returning, if you've been here for a couple days, if you've sent in any answers, if you've supported, thank you so much for joining me once again. I am so excited about these two specific sections that we read, and talking about them and reading through your guys' answers was, there's so much to say in such little time, but I'm really excited to get into this. We had a total of 23,417 words sent in answer to the questions that were for these two sections of The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice, bringing our total thus far to 56,123 words for the first two sessions of Reid Along. We did have some people send in some answers for the first session since, so I have calculated those in as well. The reason I'm including a word count is because I think a lot of us are on AO3 and we look at the word count of fanfics a lot, and we know how much 56,000 words really is, and I think it's crazy that we have that many words sent in already in response when we are only, after talking through today, 129 pages into this book. So that's a lot of things to say about Vampire Lestat, and more specifically about these two sections. So I don't want to waste any more time, and I would like for us to get started on discussing all the amazing things that you guys had to say regarding what we read this week. So without further ado, welcome to session 2 of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat book club, where we began reading The Early Education and Adventures of the Vampire Lestat, and specifically Part 1, Lelio Rising, and Part 2, The Legacy of Magnus. Part 1, Legacy of Rising, was about 44 pages in length, and Part 2, The Legacy of Magnus, was about 60 pages, giving us a total of 104 pages for this first section, meaning that we really got into the meat of this book and kind of started headfirst into all the trials and tribulations of the vampire Lestat. All right, so the next section that we read was The Legacy of Magnus, which starts on page 69. And the first question for this section was question 4 overall, which says, the first 2 chapters of The Legacy of Magnus narrate the kidnapping and turning of Lestat. In AMC's interview with the vampire, Lestat briefly talks about his kidnapping and turning in season 1, episode 6, and there are some references made to it in the tower scene in season 2, episode 8. What are the similarities you notice in the text in the show? Do you think there will be any significant changes made to these scenes in the show? If so, what changes? And what were your feelings as you first read through this horror? So, first of all, I think that going back to how Legacy of Rising starts, Anne is so great at really pulling you in at the start of these new sections. I mean, immediately this first half a page is just utterly terrifying. She doesn't hesitate to get right into what's really happening, even if it's not necessarily getting you right into the action. So it must have been 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd heard the church bells in my sleep, and like all sensible men in Paris, we had our door barred and our window locked. Not good for a room with a coal fire, but the roof was the path to our window, and we were locked in. I was dreaming of the wolves. I was on the mountain surrounded, and I was swinging the old medieval flail. Then the wolves were dead again, and the dream was better, only I had all those miles to walk in the snow. The horse screamed in the snow. My mare turned into a loathsome insect half smashed on the stone floor. A voice said, "Wolf killer," long and low, a whisper that was like a summons and a tribute at the same time. I opened my eyes, or I thought I did, and there was someone standing in the room. A tall, bent figure with its back to a little hearth. Embers still glowed on the hearth. The light moved upwards, edging the edges of the figure clearly, then dying out before it reached the shoulders, the head. But I realized I was looking right at the white face I'd seen in the audience at the theater. In my mind, opening, sharpening, realized the room was locked and Nicholas lay beside me, and that this figure stood over our bed. I highlighted that. I just put "going to be insane" in the margins. I wish I could draw, and I wish I could think of what I'm thinking about. It's from some Japanese anime. I don't watch those, but I know I've seen clips of what Magnus looks like to me, and I don't know what it's from. I will find it one day. I just imagine he's ungodly tall and long and shadows and limbs, and it's just a black void of a body and this terrifying mask of a face. I think Magnus is one of the most horrific things described in the entire Vampire Chronicles. Somebody mentions it, I don't know if it's in this question or if it's later, about how Magnus became a vampire. That really hit me hard this time reading it. He's absolutely insane. Psychotic character, terrifying. This is going to be top horror. And I really hope the show leans into the horrific aspects of him. I really do. It's one of those, I'm not looking forward to it in a general sense. It's an awful scene. But the visuals, oh my God. I can just see it so clearly. And it's terrifying. And I think a lot about surviving that and just what does that mean in general to survive that of all things. But you guys had a lot of thoughts on this too. So Alice, you said, "Man, I absolutely love this part. And does that make me unhinged? Magnus is described as this kind of insect monster man, completely unnatural in the way he moves and his face with the clown grin. Top horror." And then what a lot of people said, and I'll say it here so that way I don't have to say it the rest of the time, is that one of the biggest differences is that in the show, Lestat says that he was kept in the dungeon with the corpses. We don't learn about the corpses till way after he's turned already. He walks into the room with all the dead bodies. And so him being kept in there is already a different level of terror that he faces every second that he's there. And he also says a week in that tower before he's turned. And I think about how Magnus is testing. I mean, it's all a test. It's been a test. And he's basically passed the test with being the wolf killer. But this is the final test. And him surviving that week, and him being strong enough probably to not give in, and all of that is probably what makes Magnus just like, yeah, this is the one. Oh, it's gonna be horrible. It's going to be, I think it's gonna evoke a lot of the same feelings that I had when watching the Coven take Louis away from the stage from Claudia and locking Louis up in this crypt for months to just die, people hearing him scream and no one being there. And I think, and the way that made me feel, I think is going to be so reminiscent in how I'm going to feel about this. And I think, I just think it's gonna be awful. Nicki, one thing that you talked about is that one of the most like skin crawling scenes is Magnus dancing on all fours and laughing while being burned alive. Listen, seriously, one of the most horrific characters created is Magnus. And I think obviously we see, I think, a little bit of that with like Daciana in season 2, episode 1, and Louis and Claudia having to watch this woman throw herself on the flames and die. And you know, with her, it was a loss of hope. Magnus has hope at this point. He has hope that Lestat's going to be his heir and carry everything on forever. Yeah, most of the answers do talk about the being kept for a week, the corpses, how terrifying and everything Magnus just is as a character. There's a lot of discussion that it will probably be dramatized more in the season. I agree, I do think it will be as well. What I do want to focus on that a couple people talked about is, Carolyn, you mentioned here that this is one of the rare moments in the books where we actually have a mortal perceiving the vampire as a true monster. Vampires are so naturally, typically seductive, and especially our vampires, you know? Lestat loves to fuck around with people he kills oftentimes. We see Armand's fun little hunting game of, you know, wearing his Jimmy Choo shoes and, you know, the very unassuming thing with the hunt. Lestat often is seducing people into death and people don't think much of it. Claudia does a lot of the same, very unassuming little girl. Who's gonna question it? Louis is not as great on like the killing aspect as we've explored for 2 seasons, but when he does, you know, it's very unassuming. You don't think that he's there to kill you, like not really. And so for Magnus to be perceived as this terrifying monster is so different than anything that we've seen so far. And I think it's different than really any vampire that we will continue to see. They all typically have these very seductive qualities that Magnus is missing, and that's not done on accident. And you also mentioned how Lestat is snatched at 3 a.m., the witching hour, which is true. Just really leaning into the creepiness and spookiness of the whole thing. But I think 2 of the things that we really need to discuss regarding this section is the sexual assault aspect of it, and also the concept of Lestat's feelings towards Magnus. And this is one of those, and it would be a much deeper discussion if we were to really get into it. I think it's not that I don't understand why Anne Rice doesn't do some of the stuff that she does with characters and their abusers and the things done to them, and like still having like a love there. And I know that that's how it often works in real life, and people love people that hurt them. Like I get that. But people discuss several times throughout these answers about how it's very jarring how terrified and everything Lestat is of Magnus, only for it to kind of go into this like, oh, my maker, my creator, I love you, and whatever. And a lot of thoughts are that the show is not going to quite go down that route, and I agree. I don't think they're going to go quite down that route. I think you can walk a fine line there and show Lestat's desperation for Magnus to stay, because now he's this monstrous thing and Magnus is gonna leave him and not teach him anything. Like, I think that could be its own thing without necessarily getting into the like, oh, I love you. Because I also, like, I don't think that Lestat is that kind of person. In the sense that Lestat is, even as a human, he doesn't take well to being told no, to being told to do things, to whatever. I think he is going to be very upset at this forced churning for many a reason, but one of them is because, like, why is someone else going to try to dictate what his life is supposed to be and who he's supposed to be? He's always dictated his own life. He's not called the brat prince in the books for nothing. It's because he literally doesn't talk, like, does not listen to people. Like, as we will discover at some point, like, there is a character that is gonna be like, Lestat, don't do that, and Lestat's like, and then like does it. Or, you know, in Tale of the Body Thieves, as I was talking about earlier, Lestat, don't switch bodies with the guy that wants to switch bodies with you. That's stupid. And Lestat does it anyway. Like, he doesn't listen to people well. And so I think this idea of Magnus trying to force him to play a role and to be this thing, like, he's not going to take that well. And so I can see that being one of the driving aspects to keep him away from that kind of, oh, I love you, maker, whatever. But I still think that you can walk that fine line of the horror of him being desperate for Magnus to stay, because he has no teacher if Magnus leaves. Who's gonna tell him what he's supposed to do now that he's this thing? Like, he's this monster just existing. And then the other big thing to discuss and to talk about regarding the scene is that it is very much a metaphor for sexual assault. And I've some of the debate and the answers was about, you know, is the show going to go full out with it, or are they going to keep it a metaphor? And I don't know. Somebody pointed out that it works really powerfully as a metaphor without it having to be this outright thing. And I agree. I think that the metaphor of it, the I didn't want this, which was a lovely line improvised and thrown in by Sam Reid during the filming of that scene, which was like a one long shot scene. You know, I think that really does speak for itself in a lot of ways. I do think that doing that would show a lot of what Claudia experienced with Bruce. And I think all things considered, like, assault is very common in the world that we're reading about. I mean, and this is, you know, I think a much more debated and a much more nuanced conversation, but, you know, like, Louis with Armand, Louis can't consent to anything that's been happening with Armand. Armand's been wiping his mind. That's an assault. Claudia and Bruce, that's an assault. Armand's whole past is an assault. There is, like, assault is so common with the trauma that these vampires face, and so I don't think not showing it and going, like, all out with it is something that's entirely out of the realm of possibility either. I think no matter what they decide to do, it's going to be done extremely well, in the sense that it's going to be terrifying. I have full faith in that, and I think whether they make it more of a metaphor or make it actual sexual assault, I think it won't be lost. I think they will make sure that it comes across exactly as it's supposed to. And I think this establishment of Lestat as a victim of assault is really important too, because as somebody points out, who said it? So two people, like, we talking about, like, Louis turning. So, like, Yasra, you said in Louis turning, it felt like a slow seduction that ended in a gloriously gothic vampire wedding. And somebody else, Tommy, you said that It invokes Louis' turning and the fact that Lestat asks, would Lestat have respected it if Louis said no, and did he feel like he was giving Louis the choice he was deprived of? I don't know who's seen like the Interview with the Vampire movie, but Lestat repeatedly in the movie says, I'm going to give you the choice I never had. I'm going to give you the choice I never had. He says it like 6 or 7 times with, I think, the intention of they wanted to do another movie. Oops, never happened. But it's, I think, incredibly important to Lestat that Louis wanted this, and I think Louis wanting it is a loaded, nuanced thing too. We could get into that. I think it's ultimately a wonderful, beautiful scene, and it's very romantic, and I stand by that. That is peak romance in season 1, episode 1. And I think about how important that is to Lestat to create that type of relationship where, as Louis' maker, this is something Louis wanted. This is out of love. This is Louis created out of love. He's not created in an assault. He's created out of adoration and love, and a lot of good things go into the creation of Louis, where I don't think that's true with Lestat. I think, you know, he's afraid at the moment he's turned. He's fighting. He's like, just, there's so many conflicting, awful emotions going through his head all at once. And like, I don't think Louis, I think there's a quietness to Louis' mind after all the panic that he'd been facing. This idea that he was loved and seen is this overwhelming feeling as he's turned. Yeah, I think, you know, the week-long stay is going to be, I think, the corpse room. Again, the visuals. I'm so excited about the visuals. I think Magnus as a whole is just going to be the most god-awful thing we've ever seen in our lives. And I really do hope the show doesn't lean as much into Lestat said and like, oh, I love you, but more along the lines of like a desperation and like a resentment for being abandoned again. Because he's abandoned by a parental-ish figure again. Shocker. All right, question 5, the second question for the Legacy of Magnus, says, in chapter 12 of the Legacy of Magnus, Lestat reunites in person with Nicki and the other members of the theater troupe. Though there is warmth and happiness in this reunion, it all ultimately falls apart when Lestat takes to the stage once again. What causes his performance at Renaud to get so out of hand, and what does this tell us about Lestat? And how does this differ from the Harlequin performance we witnessed in season 2, episode 3? So, lots of thoughts again. Alice, you said this chapter is crazy. Lestat freaking out on stage. What a mess. I think he did it because he wanted to scare everyone in his life away. A lot of other people said he's trying to scare everyone away. There's a lot of just like, if he can keep people at bay. So let's look at, okay, why then does he want to keep everyone away? And I think, Tommy, you said it best here with Lestat realizes in the theater that although he is still capable of love, that love cannot stop his thirst. And it troubles him, and this performance seemed like the emotional breaking point. He has to shed his humanity, and he does so in the most dramatic way possible. Alice, you went on to continue with, like, he desperately wants to get back to the life that he had, but there's no point in wishing for something that can't be, so he forces the change. If he can't keep himself away, then he'll make them stay away from him. Savage, you said that this chaotic performance reveals important aspects of Lestat's character. He's desperate to reclaim his past but feels isolated, and revealing his emotional turmoil and his struggle to fit in with the people he once knew leads to further alienation. Moreover, his unrestrained performance shows his hubris as he believes he can still master the stage despite being out of touch with his human side, foreshadowing self-destructive traits later in the story. Lestat's relationship with art is also complex. While he is talented, the stage becomes a battleground of his fractured identity, merging his artistic ambition with his monstrous existence. You also say that Lestat's narrative at Renaud reflects the heart-wrenching pain and loss of his identity, underscoring an unstoppable transformation in his character and the closure of many doors as to what was once his own personal sanctuary. And I think that the way that you worded that is stunning. Just this idea that stage was an escape. It was, you know, when he found it at age 16, it opened up this world to him that was then snatched away. And he can't let it go. He thinks about it all the time back in his village, and then he's in Paris, and he so quickly becomes this force on the stage, and he's known. Like, there are ads with his name printed on it, and he is something that people want to see on the stage all the time. And all of a sudden, he can't be there anymore. That vampirism has snatched away the people he loves and a huge aspect as to who he is as a person. Melissa, you said, I think Lestat answers that question pretty well when he says on page 125, why did I need to prove to myself with such violence that I could never be part of them again? Yasra, you said that when Lestat is first turned, it is telling that he immediately keeps his distance from everyone he's ever known, almost instinctively understanding that his transformation would be too noticeable to his loved ones and acquaintances, or so he tells himself. Somebody, where is it? Let me find it. Somebody pointed out that this is really similar in a lot of ways to Louis's little breakdown about his nephew. Taylor, you said it feels like when Louis goes to visit Grace and almost eats his nephew, it's the realization that he isn't human, and that he views the people he loves as food and desire now rather than as humans. To me, this performance is him kind of embracing that vampirism in a sick way. It's him being so angry at himself for being a monster that he's unable to escape his true nature. And I do think it's very much in line with Louis's breakdown about his nephew, and I think it gives a new light to that scene of Lestat trying to comfort him. I oftentimes wonder if Lestat really thought about how different his and Louis's positions were in terms of like his turning and Louis's turning, because Lestat wasn't around family. Lestat, I mean, yes, there was Nicki, but like he wasn't around family that he lived with every day. Lestat never seems to propose in the idea of them leaving New Orleans when he changes Louis. So this idea that Louis will be staying in the city where he's lived his whole life, someone's gonna notice. And so he tries to tell him like, you need to stay away from them. And Louis is just like, but that's my family, you know, like I can't. And I do think it's a little hypocritical of Lestat knowing some of what happens later, but also it's because he's a baby vampire and he's learning. And so I sometimes wonder if he would have made the same choices years later when he knows a little bit more. Elsa, you said that it's interesting that it's weird in the show that Lestat comes up with the theater of the vampires. I have so much to say about that. I'm actually making a video about that because I have a thing. I'll talk about that in a second. One thing you talked about, Yasra, was how at the end of this scene is when he's like leaving, there's a moment where he drains a beggar woman and her child, and that is kind of cementing his new identity of accepting that he is a vampire. He's not deluding himself anymore to the nature that is in him. He is embracing it in a very extreme kind of way. And Lestat is extremes. There's a line in the first part in Lelio Rising where he's talking about his brother, and he's talking about the monastery, I think. Yeah, it's on page 28, and it's after his brothers come to take him back home from the monastery, and he says, then my brother Augustine started coming in and talking to me. He'd circled the point at first, but what came clear finally was that no member of a great French family was going to be a poor teaching brother. How could I have misunderstood everything so completely? I was sent there to learn to read and write. Why did I always have to go to extremes? Why did I behave habitually like a wild creature? And so Lestat's entire life is this idea of he's always gone to extremes, and we see it in the show, going to extremes. Louis talking about it with Claudia on their little boat time where he's talking about how Lestat's kills are extravagant. That's an extreme. The whole Mardi Gras, everything is an extreme. Everything's an extreme, right? And he kind of lives that way. He lives on, Lestat doesn't live in the middle of any type of situation. He is over here. He is over here. He's devastated or he's beyond excitement. Like there's just always the extremes for him. But let's talk about this Harlequin performance in season 2. I'm doing a whole video on it. I am waiting till we get to a certain point in this book to release it, but I have a lot of thoughts on the Harlequin performance and on Armand and on the theater of the vampires and everything. But the Harlequin performance is so not Lestat that it hurts me. And I think it's the first time ever watching the show that I've like questioned a characterization of something. Only to then realize that I think that this is all a lie and I think I'm right. I think I'm right. And I have a lot of reasons as to why I think I'm right. And I always thought it was interesting that they went with the Harlequin in the first place because he's Lelio, you know? And Roland Jones talked about it at the 92NY event and about how he thought Lelio was, I think he said Lelio was boring or something, and I'm like 98% sure Sam Reid gave him like a look, like the fuck. But I don't think they're confessing things that are planned for this season. And again, this is all guessing. I don't think Lestat was ever the Harlequin. I think it's Armand making fun of Lestat in the way that Armand can, which is calling him a clown. The idea of Lestat on the stage is, as a vampire, is almost like an antithesis to his character, because this scene is formative in who Lestat is. And so the idea that he would just like willy-nilly go back on the stage and like flounce around in the Theater of the Vampires, I disagree with it so much. But then Carolyn, you mentioned that, and I know that we're kind of jumping ahead because all this comes in later, but as we know, the Theater of the Vampires does come around. And do I want to talk about it now? Okay, I'm gonna wait, but I am gonna talk about how you talk about how, though all this happens, Lestat, as we see in our more modern time and as we see in the season 3 teaser, is gonna be on the stage again as a rock star. And is that not the same thing? Is that not identical to what he did? Theoretically, yes, him getting on the stage and confessing all this vampiric nature and everything is identical. But I do think that the motivations are different, and I think the control is different. And I also think for the modern day Lestat, one of the huge differences why returning to the stage is okay at this point is because everyone he loves is a vampire. Louis's a vampire. It doesn't matter. You know, Louis knows who he is. Louis knows his nature. Louis knows his nature better than anyone at this point. He doesn't need to hide from that. He's not trying to spare the people he loves. Louis knows. Any other vampire knows. Who cares what the people think? So I think that's why. I think that's why the stage is now different. But I think it takes some nerve getting back on the stage after everything that happened with it last time. So I'm curious to see how that's going to play out. But yeah, a lot of just his acceptance of evil. And I think this goes into, we talked about it a little bit in the last session, this idea of true evil and how Lestat thinks that he's truly evil. And it's kind of crazy to think that I think he accepts that here, and it has continued into 1984 in the books. It's kind of a long time to really sit there and think about yourself as a truly evil person. All right, question 7 was the start of our other questions. And the first question was, what was your favorite part of this section or sections, and why was it your favorite? So I'll share mine first, and then I will just kind of read through what some of you have down. And God, you know, and I think it's the same issue. How do you narrow this down? The wolf scene, of course. The turning scene, stunning. The Renaud's performance. If I were to choose kind of like an underrated favorite scene, God, I don't know. If I were to choose an underrated favorite scene, I would probably go with when Lestat is kind of exploring his little tower now for the first time and discovering all of these things and going into the treasure room and finding all the treasure. I have a lot of stars. It's really hard to narrow this down. There is one scene, I posted it on my Instagram because it made me laugh. This is one of those, like, I really want to see it on the screen, and I really want to see Sam Reid act it out, which is, if find it. Okay, here. So it's on page 107, and it's in the Legacy of Magnus. So he's a vampire, whatever, and he's at Pierre Roger, his lovely little lawyer, and it's but as the nights passed and these gifts were dispatched, Renaud became embarrassed about all this. A fortnight later, Roger told me Renaud had made a proposal. He wanted me to buy the House of Thespians and keep him on as manager with enough capital to stage larger and more wondrous spectacles than he'd ever before attempted. With my money and his cleverness, we could make the house the talk of Paris. I didn't answer right away. It took me more than a moment to realize that I could own the theater just like that. Own it like the gems in the chest, or the clothes I wore, or the dollhouse I'd sent my nieces. I said no and went out slamming the door. Then I came right back. All right, buy the theater, I said, and give him 10,000 crowns to do whatever he wants. This was a fortune, and I didn't even know why I had done this. I just think the comedic aspect of like getting up, slamming the door, walking back in, I honestly think that'll have me rolling, and I'm really excited about it, and I need that scene, and I'm really excited to see Sam Reid do it because I think it'll be funny, and I need a good laugh because like there's so much bad and like horror and terror and existentialism. Like I need a good laugh, so if they could include that, I would appreciate it very much. Thank you. But other things that people said, Alex, you said that even though all instances are very brief, Lestat does feel joy in this section, and at those moments I do smile. I know. Like, I know we've talked about Louis, like, not having a lot of happy moments, and that's because Louis just, like, visually and internally leans a lot into his sadness, whereas that doesn't. Obviously, we've discussed that, optimism, whatever, but, like, Lestat really hasn't had a ton of, like, joyful moments either. I just want them to be happy and in love. I don't feel like I'm asking a lot right now. Alice, you said the turning, that Magnus is creepy as hell, and Lestat fighting back until the very end makes you love him all the more. Jana, you said that your favorite part is the line that Lestat says before his turning, which is brave, not stubborn, which is such a good line. It's such a good line for him. Nicki, you said that you have so many favorite scenes: the wolves, the witch's place, the musings on existentialism, the sweet moments of Lestat. Talking to the Italian transcriber. Listen, I speak conversational Italian, and I would pay money to hear a lot of Italian this upcoming season because I'm sick of the French. Give me some Italian, break it up. I would really love some Italian in the upcoming season, like decent amount. Not to give Sam Reid more work to do and to learn. I know he did that brief line in Italian in season 1, episode 2, but I would like more. You also talked about the bonding scene with Lestat and Gabrielle, talking about wanting to kill the Marquis and the brothers and everything, and it's an interesting bonding moment, that's for sure. Tommy, you said your favorite part of the section was Lestat and Nicki's conversation. I didn't expect to like Nicki. I hate Nicki, so I can't relate, but I love that you love him, I think. I'm trying so hard. I really tried to like Nicki. I did. I know no one will believe me, but I did. Savage, you said that your favorite part of the section of the book is on chapter 11 on page 93, where Lestat talks about himself not being able to become the old Lestat, and that he is a demon, and just kind of this like acceptance of his evilness. Melissa, you said everything that has to do with Nicki and Lestat, especially the first night they spent together at the inn. I can't really talk about that. I can't. I just think Nicki is cynical and condescending and mean and nasty little boy. Just nasty little boy. I don't like him. Ugh, I'm glad you guys do. I'm happy for you. I'm happy that you don't hate him, I think. Yasra, you said your favorite part of the section is chapter 12. Sorry, I'm laughing at something else. Different thing. Yasra, you said that your favorite part of the section was definitely chapter 12, from start to finish. And kind of that disturbing but gorgeous description of the mother and child killing at the end, where it says, "And as I went out in the early morning, I knew that the last barrier between my appetite and the world had been dissolved. No one was safe from me now, no matter how innocent." Elsa, you said that your favorite part is also the least favorite, which is the dark moment, and worried about how deep and dark some of these themes can be, but how ultimately like it lets you kind of embrace some of that without having to quite live in that anxiety yourself all the time. Katie, you said part of me wants to say the wolf scene because it's the moment, and it's definitely up there. And you said that though you don't really like the Gabrielle Lestat like stuff, or necessarily like the Nicki Lestat stuff, you think that the interactions that Lestat has with them are hugely important to overall character development. And I agree. I think obviously, again, no matter how you feel about these characters, knowing their importance to the story is very important. And I do understand how important, and I think we're gonna really see Gabrielle. I think we're gonna really hone in on how important Gabrielle is to Lestat as a character. I think this idea too, and you talked about it, how like Lestat and Nicki's relationship is a stepping stone in a lot of ways. And I think I could do a whole conversation on this. Nicki is just so cynical, and Louis is sad, but I don't think Louis is cynical. And I think Louis that we're seeing in season 2, episode 8 isn't really any of those things anymore. Not that he doesn't have moments of sadness, but I don't think it's who he is anymore. And I think that ultimately that's so good that I think he and Lestat actually think very similarly now. And I think that will allow them to be together again and be happy and work through things this time. HPU said that, like, you know, there's so many scenes. The wolf killing scene, Lestat's youth and the connection with his mother. Paris, the turning scene. Lestat with the horses. He does, like, yeah, he really is like a little animal lover, a little dog boy. His like inner turmoil and everything post-turning. But you said ultimately that your favorite part is just getting to know Lestat for the first time, that he's this passionate and sensitive, driven, empathetic, tough, and unwaveringly optimistic person despite everything. And that he's very compelling as a character, and he is. I mean, there's a reason that he is the character of the Vampire Chronicles in a lot of ways, beyond Anne Rice's own weird obsession with him. Like, he's a very compelling character, and I am excited to get to know more of that character as we move forward. Yeah, Valerie, you talked about enjoying like baby vamp Lestat and how he viewed and experienced vampirism in comparison to Louis. There is something so fun about their baby vampiric days. Like, I'm obsessed with season 1, episode 2, and like Louis just high as a kite. Like, you know, just whatever. But like, he's so cute. That's the hungriest little kitten I've ever seen in my whole life. And I think that we see it with you know, baby vampire Lestat in a lot of ways. And his is a little more sad because he's alone. But I do love a baby vamp. I do love a baby vampire. They're so fun. Just learning how to take their first steps out of the nest, you know? And then Carolyn, you said that there's so many. You said that your favorite of probably the whole book is chapters 4 through 8 of Lelio Rising. And you talked about how the witch's place, and that this is a non-negotiable. And for season 3, that it needs, and I agree, I think the witch's place is very significant. I think it's kind of interesting it hasn't been alluded to really before yet. I mean, I get it, and I get why it hasn't, but sometimes they throw in things, so I'm a little surprised it hasn't been mentioned, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Carolyn, you said that that you love Nicki beyond Lestat, like for Nicki himself, but you're aware that it is unlikely to be anywhere near as much Nicholas on the telly as you would wish for. I mean, I feel like we have opposite feelings on that, but I do agree. I don't think we're gonna get as much Nicki as I think a lot of people think we're going to. Not that he's gonna be absent. I just think that certain things have changed. It has to do with my 2-3 video. I'm working on it. I do think that the show making Lestat significantly older than Nicki is one of those aspects that will change how that relationship is shown very drastically. I'm a little surprised by it. But yeah, a lot of the favorite sections were a lot of, I think, what are the most important sections of Lestat's life. And I think with a lot of like logical reason. The wolf scene, I mean, I think arguably the wolf scene and the turning scene are going to be the most visually stunning scenes. I don't want to say the most, okay, that's a very large weight to put on those scenes. I think they will be some of the most visually stunning scenes of season 3, and I'm very excited about it. And I think, one, how that does frame understanding Lestat and everything is so imperative. But I agree with Alex, any of those brief moments of happiness, I'm like, oh, thank God, he's got something to smile about today. They're rare. And I'm excited because I think one thing that is true with the present of Lestat in the books and the present that we're seeing of Louis in the show is that they are both in realm to be happy people. It does exist as possibility for them. It's not there yet, but it could be. And I think obviously they're gonna find it together. And then as we get to the end of this book, you're gonna see why it doesn't happen. And they're gonna be happy one day. They're gonna be happy. They're gonna be happy and in love and safe, and it's gonna be great. All right, question 8, we're so close, said, when season 3 airs, which part of the section do you think is the most imperative moment for us to see play out on the screen, and why? So in general, the biggest ones were what we've discussed, which is the wolves and the turning scene. Alex, you said, I need AMC to get their money up so we can have all the wolves. I don't want any workarounds. I don't want them to unleash real wolves or wolf-like dogs on our boy either. Get some well-made CGI wolves for him to slay and slaughter. Open your purse. Girl, you know that's not gonna happen. You know they're not gonna open up their purse. But I do think Sam Rae could fight real wolves. I maintain that. I stand by that. I think they can pull a Nosferatu, have some real wolves. He'll be fine. I have faith in him. Get more faith in him, Alex. He'll be fine. Yeah, no, I do want like really, and I want like good. We're in the year of our Lord and Savior 2025. We can do good CGI. Invest. It is the scene, you know? Invest. Alice, you said this is a hard question. My thoughts go straight to the turning, probably because it's what I want to see, but I'm not sure that it's imperative that it's shown on the screen because we kind of already know what's happened. So perhaps maybe the aspects of his relationship with his mother, because it explains a lot of his behavior later on, and the audience might need to be shown that. We are in a horrible time period where people do need to be explicitly shown a lot for them to get things, which is a whole educator problem. Showing, not telling, you know, telling, not showing, whatever. But you said, but being self-indulgent, I want the turning part. Can you imagine Sam delivering the line, not stubborn, brave, not stubborn? No, I can't. Because if I think about it, I'll cry, and I don't have time for that emotionally. Jana, you said the beginning of Lily Rising, like obviously because of how it shapes who he is. Nicki, you did say that, but if you had to choose just like one of these scenes to be shown rather than told, you think that it should be the entirety of his kidnapping and turning by Magnus. I am very curious how they're gonna handle all of that, because one, I feel like that's like a whole episode. I feel like if you really get into everything that happens in this scene and to really focus on the damage and the terror of it, I feel like it's a whole, like, again, I don't know anything about screenwriting. I know stuff about books. I don't know enough about screenwriting, but it feels like that would be like a whole episode. But I've read something, I think one of the TVL writers just posted like something about episode scripts are typically like 10,000 words. That's crazy to me. That's so little words. Tommy, you said, I feel like so much of Lestat's turning is disjointed and sort of unreal, and you think that that would play out really well on screen, but specifically showing like the half lucid state that he's in, that horror and joy that he feels. Savage, you're the one who mentioned you want to see Magnus talk about his origin story before he burns himself. So I feel like this is a scene, because it's just one little paragraph and it's not something that people, I think, focus on as heavily. And it's on page 77. And it says where, it's like right at the middle of the page, and Lestat says, I slipped into a web of radiant dreams. A catacomb I saw, a rank place, and a white vampire creature waking in a shallow grave. Bound in heavy chains he was, the vampire, and over him bent this monster who had abducted me, and I knew that his name was Magnus, and that he was mortal still in the stream, a great and powerful alchemist, and that he had unearthed and bound this slumbering vampire before the crucial hour of dusk. And now as the light died out of the heavens, Magnus drank from his immortal prisoner the magical and accursed blood that would make him one of the living dead. Treachery it was, the theft of immortality, a dark Prometheus stealing a luminescent fire. Laughter in the darkness, laughter echoing in the catacomb, echoing as if down the centuries, and the stench of the grave, and the ecstasy, absolutely fathomless and irresistible, and then drawing to a finish. That man kidnapped a vampire to make himself a vampire. That's crazy. That is so against everything that we learn about vampires. And like, even Louis's like acceptance of vampirism is not, I don't know how to say this with it sounding right. It's not like he's like, oh, I'm gonna be a vampire and live forever. It's this idea of being loved and seen, you know? It's not this desire for power. It's not whatever. Lestat's turning is forced. Claudia has no idea that she's even being turned. Armand was dying when he's turned. Just every vampire that we learn about, it's just what, and there's the Magnus. Oh my God, he's so creepy. I don't fuck with him. Yasra. I think when we meet Lestat in season 1, he is already completely at ease with killing. The show also seems to have changed a few things about Lestat's reintegration with his human circle in 2-3. But so 3 things that you think that we need to see on screen are the killing of the wolves, the moment of his turning by Magnus in contrast with Louis to make us better understand Lestat as a maker, the kill that cements the philosophy around feeding as a vampire. I don't think AMC will be able to adapt to the killing of the mother and child though. I don't know, I'm curious. I don't watch The Walking Dead, but like I know they do some pretty crazy things on there. And I know that Roland Jones would have no issue with it. One of his other shows, like the first episode has a dead baby. So he would do that. So I don't know if AMC could get away with it. Then again, we can't even like get actual thrusting. So maybe not. But that could just be an American prudish, I don't know. Are we on the 10 o'clock slot yet? I just have questions. Elsa, you said that I hope that they include Lestat's insistent drive for goodness. Lestat's idea of the goodness in art, which continues through the books, is something that's very important to you. I agree. I think that it's imperative to understanding Lestat as a character. If he doesn't get to relish in the goodness of what is out there and what he thinks life can be and who he can be, then what's the point? And he constantly does it. He's always thinking of goodness. Even when he's not, he's thinking of goodness. Katie, you said it's a pretty equal split between the wolf killing and the direct aftermath of Lestat's turning. With the wolves, it feels a bit too iconic to leave out, given that this is the first real adaptation of TVL. I agree. I think people would be very upset. Not me. I would be fine. I'd be very upset. So yeah. So I mean, I think that that's a thing. And then again, I need to see Sam with long hair and a sword and a flail. I talked about it in my, I think, season 3 like teaser trailer video. I really don't remember what video it was now. But I'm like, if I see Sam Reid with the sword, I'm gonna black out. Just need everyone to be ready and aware. Anyway, moving on from that. I'm feeling real normal about it. And Carolyn, you said The Witch's Place, which as you mentioned is like for you a non-negotiable. You know, I think The Witch's Place, I agree. I think it has to be shown. I think it is a moment of Lestat's life that really highlights what we mentioned earlier, that like strive for goodness and everything. Carolyn, you said, I also think that it's important to convey Lestat's feelings about art as a mortal versus as a vampire, although maybe not necessarily the same way as in the book. And then you said, I'm not sure if Lestat's onstage crisis would work exactly as written on TV. I don't know how they're gonna do the Renaud's crisis. I feel like you have to. I feel like the Renaud's crisis has to happen, but I am curious to see how they're gonna do it, because I feel like they will handle, there's a word that he says in that scene and it's pandemonium. And I think they will handle the pandemonium really well no matter what. And I'm really curious. I think they will have the iconic him getting shot through the chest and the wounds healing. I think, because I think that's such such an iconic thing. It reminds me, there's one of the many X-Men Wolverine movies with Wolverine, you know, he doesn't die. There's like one scene where he does something, you watch like his skin just like fix itself, and it's like kind of horrific, because he, you know, his immortality and stuff too. Anyway, yeah, I'm excited about, I mean, so much, and I think imperatively, again, the usual suspects. So one thing I think that is imperative and that I am really excited to see is this constant mention of the presence. I'm curious how they're gonna do it. Like if they'll always have it be like a sound that he hears behind him and he turns and there's nothing there, or if they'll just have it kind of be like a look takes over and he like looks around, or if he'll hear something, you know, kind of reminiscent of the whole, you know, wolf killer whispering. I'm also really excited to see, I don't think it's like imperative, but I'm excited to see Magnus in the theater watching Lestat. I think that is its own terrifying moment of him on the stage, and it's bright and everyone out there is kind of a blur, but then you just see this face. And it's funny because that like little scene is done in the show a little bit with someone's watching me, but it's about Armand. And that's just Armand giving himself too much credit again. All right, and our final question for the second session of Read Along was a self-indulgent question by all means, which is, how do you think Louis would/will react to hearing these moments of Lestat's life? To which Alex said, like this, hopefully. I do love when he's like, he's just so sad. And he's so pretty when he's so sad. God, I miss him. I miss Louis every day. Alice, you said that you think that he'll be enthralled and horrified appropriately. And probably be like, well, that explains a lot. And that it will allow him to sympathize with Lestat more and increase his own guilt about certain things, because if Louis isn't internalizing things to torture himself with, is he really Louis? You don't gotta call him out like that, Alice. You don't gotta do that to him. But you're right. Yeah, if he's not internalizing guilt, because like, yeah, ultimately, I do think he'll feel a lot of guilt. And then there's a lot of like, well, how could he have known? You know, Lestat didn't tell him. He can't know, and he can't read Lestat's mind. So it's not, but man, he will internalize that shit. That's gonna be bad. Oh, he's gonna be the saddest boy in the world again. No, it's okay. He's gonna be fine. Louis is doing great. Jana, you said that you think he might be angry that Lestat has not told him all of this before, but now he's telling others. I do think that approach will be interesting, like how they go about. Is he telling Daniel and like putting it out in this documentary, and like Louis is not necessarily the person he's telling this to, or is it something that maybe he does express to Louis, or Louis is there and that's why Lestat can open up? You know, who knows how they're gonna actually handle that. Nikki, you said, I think Louis will be heartbroken and horrified to hear the detail of how disturbing Lestat's turning was and how alone Lestat felt throughout his childhood. And you think this will bring them closer together because it will show a lot of Lestat's vulnerability. And you said, I think that if they choose to adapt, I think Louis will find Lestat's musings on existentialism fascinating, and they might find some commonality there to bond them further. So one of my favorite scenes in season 2 is, and arguably like one of my favorite Louis and Armand scenes, is the scene at the jazz cafe where they're talking about goodness and evil and stuff. And it's such a fascinating conversation. And I think Louis really loves being able to talk about that. And while I'm sure he and Lestat have talked about it, and because I fully believe that they have talked about it, and I think we see little bits of that, like in season 1, episode 3, when they're sitting on the bench at the beginning, and you know, Louis, you know, talking about stuff. I think that is a moment that they do that. But I think Lestat has withheld a lot because he can't tell Louis things. And now, if he can, I think they can really just have these beautiful conversations, because Lestat loves intellectual conversation. I think people like to paint Lestat as like not an intellectual because he is very dramatic and he is, you know, whatever. But he's smart. Like those conversations with Nicki all about goodness and stuff, he enjoys them. And I think he doesn't let Nicki's pessimism always get to him in those scenes, because I think he's just enjoying being able to have that conversation at all because he has been so alone. So I think this idea that he can have conversations like that with Louis, but they can be in some more agreement. They won't always agree. It's Lestat and Louis. They're not always going to agree. But I think just like having those conversations and being able to, you know, Lestat being able to be like, well, and this time this happened. And Louis was like, oh my God, I was quoting shit that happened in the 1800s. And Lestat's like, Louis, you don't understand, you weren't there. And Louis was like, yeah, I wasn't there, I wasn't born yet, and you know, like that kind of, like, I think it'd be so good for them. Yeah. But Tommy, you said that a lot of things Lestat does are inspired by trauma, and Louis will find a lot of parallels between Lestat's past and their life together in the Rue Royale. And that'll be interesting to see what he does with that. I seriously think there's gonna be a lot of light bulb moments, like, oh, that's why that happened. Oh, that's why that happened. Oh, that's why that happened. Savage, you think that Louis will probably cry a little bit with kind of in the emotional way that he took in Lestat talking about his turning in season 1, episode 6. I remember there are a couple moments in the show, I'm say that there's more than a couple, but there were a couple moments that really had me taken aback, and one of them, and some of those moments are when Lestat does say something about his past, or Louis says something about Lestat's past, because like in interview, Lestat does not say anything and Louis knows nothing. Like there's like, I think a lot about the chess scene when Lestat and Claudia are playing chess and she's talking about Nicki, and like Louis is not surprised by this. Louis knows about all of this. That's fascinating to me. It took me aback so much. And so I remember watching season 1, episode 6 for the first time, and when Lestat started talking about being taken by Magnus and we get to see Louis' reaction to that, oh, I didn't know what to do with that, because we've never seen anything like that. We've never read anything like that. And so this idea of Louis, and you see it on Louis' face in season 1, episode 6, the devastation at Lestat sharing this part of himself and knowing how horrific it was, and that he's held on to that for 100+ years, and now he's just telling it, and it's like it explains a lot, and also it's heart-wrenching, man. And then Claudia's doubt of it, which makes perfect sense. I understand why she doubts it so much, and then I feel like her doubt can feed into Louis' doubt, and that's just a cycle. Oh my God. Melissa, you said that you think that this will have Louis fall in love with Lestat all over again now that he's had a glimpse of Lestat as a human being. I lament that they never will get to know each other as humans. It makes me really sad. Like, I know for many a reason it couldn't happen, but I think the both of them in like another world meeting as human beings, oh, they could have been so good for each other. Thank God they can be good for each other now in a vampire form, but like, oh, little sweet human babies. Yasser, you said that I think Louis may already know a little bit about Magnus, so any details he knows, he'll learn will only make him feel bad for his little baby. And that it will gain a better understanding of like Lestat's behavior and Nola by hearing about his childhood and his abusive family. I think it's going to highlight a lot of the stuff with Claudia, and I think that's going to be its own brand of devastation for Louis, like seeing that Lestat's trauma that hasn't been confronted, how it did impact a lot of the stuff with raising Claudia for them. Taylor, you said that one of the things that you hope that we see is that it's very clear that Louis knows that when he was turned that he was loved, and what that really means, the weight of that, what that really means. And I think with Louis' acceptance of vampirism at the end of season 2 and going into season 3 and then learning about this, I do think he's gonna be very aware. And I think, you know, in the same sense of thanking Lestat for the gift after all this time, I think realizing just how he was made out of that love and adoration that we've discussed, I think it's gonna be one of those foundational bridges that they need to be together again, and I think it could be very, very beautiful. Katie, Louis is not jealous of Nicki. Pale proxy conversation. He has nothing to be jealous about with that dead boy. HB, you said that there's gonna be some probably like conflicting feelings, that there might be some almost anger and questioning as to why Lestat didn't tell him, which we will find out some of why Lestat didn't tell him, but that it will also spark some like protectiveness and affection out of him, because it explains a lot of who Lestat is, and that ultimately it's going to play into Louis's decision of them being back together, because I do think it needs to be Louis's decision again. Obviously Lestat, but Lestat's been talking about Louis for 70 years in that little shack, just rotting away. He's in for the long haul. We just got to get Louis to sort some stuff out. He's fine. He'll get there. Valerie said, I can't wait to see Louis's reaction to Lestat's life story. I just know Jacob Anderson will deliver an amazing performance at hearing about the horrors of Lestat's life. I think his heart will break for Lestat at hearing about the responsibilities that were thrown at him as a young man and the abuse that he suffered. And it will help him recognize the humanity in Lestat. I think, and again, I think kind of going back to that conversation of the parentified roles that Louis and Lestat have both played, I think it will give them another commonality, that he'll be able to be like, oh, like, that's like me, and like, obviously different ways, but that's like me, you know, we're the same. Where I think he's very much thought he and Lestat are so different. Like, I love him, but he's so different than me, when I don't actually think they're all that incredibly different, you know? Carolyn, you said, I think Lestat's story is important to Louis so he understands the entirety of who Lestat is, but it makes you think, did Louis ever ask Lestat about his childhood? And if not, why not? And if so, what did Lestat say to avoid answering it? Did Lestat ever really ask Louis about like his childhood stuff and whatever? But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know in the books, like, Louis doesn't necessarily ask Lestat about like childhood, but he asks him questions, and Lestat always has like a way to get around it in the book. And given that we know that there's been like off-camera conversations about Nicki and stuff, I'm assuming he probably has, or maybe I'm giving him benefit of the doubt because I love him. I don't know. I would assume yes. Lestat's really good at talking his way around things. As for Louis's childhood, one thing that I do hope that we get to see in season 3 is glimpses of Lestat's point of view of Louis's turning, because I really want how in season 2, episode 6, when they turn Madeline, we see that little montage of her life. I want a Louis montage. I want to see what Lestat saw, and so maybe he doesn't ask about it because he's already felt it and he's seen it, and he knows Louis was a child, and he's seen all of that, and he's, you know, seen Louis grow up kind of in his own eyes. I love that so much. Please give that to me. Pay you $5 extra than my AMC subscription. You also said, Carolyn, that by the end of season 2, we have already seen that he already understands and loves Lestat, which brings up this idea that we don't necessarily need to see Louis hear about child Lestat and Nicholas. Like, there's an element that would maybe be a bit cruel, like for Lestat to tell Louis in great detail about Nicki, like what Lestat ever wants to hear in detail about everything Louis ever felt for anybody else, like for Jonah or any, like, you know, other, you know, man he's ever been interested in. So yeah, I don't know, because I don't think Louis has anything to be jealous about, nor do I think he will feel jealousy, as he says in season 2, episode 8, that, you know, anyone Lestat would meet from here on out is a pale proxy, and I think Nicki is a pale proxy as well. And so, like, I fully believe, like, Louis believes that. I think a little bit of his confidence is enough there where he does believe that. So I don't think that there's any, like, jealousy, but I do think it would still be a little off-putting. But again, also, I think Lestat and Nicki's relationship is going to be shown very differently on the screen. Like, I have a lot of thoughts on how I think it's going to go. And I do kind of worry for people that like Nicki and Lestat, because I don't think never mind, that's a different thing. But like, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see. But that concludes all the questions for session 2 of Read Along, the Vampire Lestat book club. One of the things that was really difficult with this section was that it's a very large section and a very important section. I wanted to ask questions about the presence and about the witch's place, and I wanted to ask questions about Nicki and Lestat, and I wanted to ask questions about Gabrielle and Lestat, but I felt like I needed to prioritize certain things, and I think we have options to delve into those topics later, so I tried to focus on the things that were important very specifically for these sections. But there's so much to talk about and so much to discuss, and I feel like these two sections in particular are going to be so beautiful on the screen and done with a lot of care by our writing team and actors and everybody, and I'm very excited about it. I'm very nervous about it too, just in a general sense. I think it's really gonna hit us whenever season 3 airs that we are seeing the Vampire Lestat adapted for the first time, and how significant that is. And I'm so excited about it. And I know everyone on set and all the writers and everyone, I know everyone's so excited about it, and I can't wait to see what they come up with. And I'm excited about a lot of the stuff you guys talked about, and I thank you so much for sending in such lovely and detailed answers once more, because this has been so fun and continues to be so fun, and I'm very excited to get into our next session, which will be session 3 of Reid Along, the Vampire Lestat Book Club, in which we will be reading part 3, which is titled Viaticum for the Marquise. I did look up the word viaticum. I did not know that one off the top of my head, which is defined as, I wrote it in the book, the Eucharist as given to a person near or in danger of death, or archaic meaning, a supply of provisions or an official allowance of money for a journey, which I think both uses of that definition are fascinating. And then the other section we will be reading is section 4, which is titled The Children of Darkness. God, Armand's little coven cult. Viaticum for the Marquise is roughly page 133 to 180, making it 47 pages. And part 4, The Children of Darkness, is page 183 to 235, making it about 52 pages, giving us right at 99 pages of reading for the next session. We are officially getting into some of what we've already seen in season 2 with our season 2 episode 3 1700s flashback, and we are also getting ready to get introduced to some very important and familiar characters and some new characters, and characters that I think will shed light on a lot of season 2 goings on that we saw. We will be revisiting the Théâtre des Vampires again. So going back to some familiar stomping ground for those show watchers out there. And I'm so excited to talk about more of Gabrielle as she shows up a little bit as our Marquise, and to talk about this presence that's been haunting Lestat around, and all that these next couple sections are going to bring to light. But thank you so much for joining me for session 2. And I cannot wait to see what we talk about in session 3. I'm trying so hard. I'm trying so hard to not be a bitch about Nicki. It's not working. I really am. I didn't want to like him, but I went into this trying to be open, and it's not working. I have to cut so much of this because I'm just like, fuck that guy. The cynical, condescending,